following day, the 16th of January 1966, Major Nzeogwu called a conference of all officers in Kaduna to brief them on what had been achieved and to issue instructions for future operations. Addressing the conference, Nzeogwu stressed his determination to deal ruthlessly with those who showed signs of sitting on the fence and the opportunists. In this connection, he announced that Ojukwu and Katsina were enemies of the revolution and would be disposed of as soon as possible. He accused Katsina of showing insufficient interest in the revolution by never showing up at the brigade headquarters and failing to attend the conference without excuses. He accused Ojukwu of being a letdown for reasons best known only to Nzeogwu himself. On my advice in the conference hall, Nzeogwu agreed to give Ojukwu one more chance of joining the revolution and immediately appointed me to go to Kano and find out from him what his real stand was. While in Kano, Nzeogwu also wanted me to collect £500,000 sterling from the central bank for the payment of soldiers in northern Nigeria under his command. Speaking about future operations, Nzeogwu announced he had grouped all forces under his control into 3 task forces. The first task force was given the task of moving further north to Zaria and Kano to consolidate his control on those areas and to remove all opposition where it still existed. The second task force had the assignment of moving through Jeba to take Ibadan, the capital of Western Nigeria, and subsequently Lagos. The third task force was to move on the eastern axis through Makurdi to take Enugu, the capital of Eastern Nigeria, and later Benin, the capital of Midwestern Nigeria. The task of the Nigerian Air Force was to fit machine guns to their training aircrafts in preparation for strafing and bombing Lagos when orders were given after the fall of Ibadan. The Air Force bombs were to be hand grenades, and the pilots were already practicing at the outskirts of Kaduna how to strafe with machine guns and release grenades from their planes. Most, if not all, the officers attending this conference listened to Nzeogwu's orders with absolute joy and excitement. When Nzeogwu in conclusion said, "Nigeria has a population of 50 million. We can afford and we are prepared to sacrifice 1 million to achieve our aims and objectives," the conference hall was virtually brought down by the applause of the young officers. The D-Day was to be the 18th of January 1966, and each task force had artillery and armored vehicles in support. Before the end of the conference, Major Ukpo Isong, a Calabar officer under Katsina's command, was appointed by Nzeogwu to take a small force and go and arrest Katsina with orders to shoot him if he resisted. Along with Nzeogwu in his office after the conference, I very carefully and cautiously disagreed with his plan and future intentions. I argued that I was the wrong person to go to Kano to meet Ojukwu as well as collect soldiers' pay because my presence was necessary in Kaduna at all times. For this task, I thought a junior officer would do. Nzeogwu accepted his suggestion. Also, I advised that Katsina should not be persuaded to come down to the headquarters as opposed to his being arrested. I thought no harm ought to come to him until it was positively proved beyond all doubt that he was against the revolution. Finally, I advised Nzeogwu again, rightly or wrongly, to give up the idea of launching an attack on the South. My points of arguments were that the civil regime had been overthrown and the army was in control of the federal government, thus fulfilling his overall aim. If he therefore attacked southern Nigeria, it would be seen as a military struggle for a power between him and Ironsi, a struggle which could degenerate into a civil war and bloodbath. Moreover, I thought Nzeogwu would very easily and quickly lose his military advantage over Ironsi, who was in a position to call for outside military assistance. Soon afterwards, on the evening of the 16th of January, news came from Kano that Captain Ude, who had gone there with a message from Nzeogwu for Ojukwu, was under arrest and was being held in the 5th Battalion guard room. The following day, when I got to the brigade headquarters in the morning, there was tension and feverish activity. Outside the headquarters, a strong company group, supported by 2 ferrets and a Saladin armored car, formed up under Captain Onwategu, an instructor under Nzeogwu at the military college. This force, as I soon found out, was about to leave for Kano to ensure that 5th Battalion joined the revolution. The instruction was to avoid the use of force and the consequent loss of lives unless it became necessary. Realizing that the special task force was formed to do battle in Kano, I convinced Nzeogwu to cancel the operation, and he did so. He then asked me to devise a more peaceful means of ensuring the full cooperation of the 5th Battalion in Kano and the release of Captain Ude from arrests. I had by now discouraged all future operations, and in my attempt to get a quick and tidy end to Nzeogwu's revolution, I had created a stalemate. Ironsi was sitting in Lagos, ruling the south, and Nzeogwu was ruling the north from Kaduna, and there was no real link or dialogue between the two of them. I thought Nzeogwu should submit to Ironsi, and for this reason, I began to speak to him about the need for a unified military leadership of the nation under Ironsi. I also pointed out that unless the wandering troops were disarmed and sent back to the barracks at once, they could eventually get out of hand. Already, numerous illegal roadblocks had been set up all over the towns where the army had stationed in northern Nigeria by soldiers of all military units, and civilians were being disposed and molested. On my initiative, I had ordered the gunners deployed in Kaduna town to go back to barracks with their guns, but they refused to do so unless the instructions came from Nzeogwu. Later that day, both Ironsi and Gowon spoke to me over the telephone. Ironsi said my new task was to bring Nzeogwu down to Lagos, dead or alive, and then handed me over to Gowon to work out the details of how that was to be done with him. Over the telephone, Gowon passionately described how he had come back from Britain on the night of 14th January 1966, a day before the coup started. Gowon narrated the story of his narrow escapes from death in the hands of the revolutionaries, who he said were after him the whole night and throughout the following day. He suggested that I find sufficient troops to attack and destroy Nzeogwu. I refused to do this because, as I told him, all troops were already under Nzeogwu's control in the north. In addition, I pointed out that even if troops were available, it would be unwise on my part to fight against what appeared to be a popular revolution. Gowon then suggested that I should arrange with a doctor to sedate Nzeogwu while appearing to be treating his injured neck. Nzeogwu could then be brought down to Lagos in that state. I once again had many reasons why this could not be done. Foremost among them was the fact that the only one doctor in northern Nigeria at that treated Nzeogwu, and this doctor would definitely not have consented to such a suggestion. I explained to Gowon that the coup was completely over in the north and Nzeogwu was prepared to settle with Lagos under two main conditions. One was a guarantee of safety for himself and others who took part in the coup, and the other was an assurance that the aims of the revolution would be upheld at all times by the Lagos regime. Later, I telephoned Ironsi again and gave him those conditions as demanded by Nzeogwu, and promised to convince Nzeogwu to hand over power completely to him if these assurances were honestly given. Ironsi accepted the conditions and invited Nzeogwu to Lagos. Nzeogwu formally handed over power to Ironsi and had agreed to go to Lagos in a telephone conversation during the evening of the 18th January 1966. This enabled Ironsi to announce the appointment of military governors, one for each of the four regions, the North, West, East, and the Midwest. Major Katsina was appointed governor of the North, Lieutenant Colonel Francis Fadri for the West, Ejo for the Midwest, and Ojukwu for the East. Immediately after the announcement of the new governors, Major Keshi, the brigade major 1st Brigade, telephoned my house to say that, in his view, the appointment of one of the military governors was a grievous mistake. Major Keshi also expressed the same view to Nzeogwu, who said he would take up the matter with Ironsi when he arrived in Lagos. He thought that, by that appointment, cowardice had been rewarded in a revolution designed to bring to the forefront only the best the nation could muster. Nzeogwu also felt that Ironsi ought to move the new governors to regions other than their regions of origin. By the time Colonel Conrad Nwawo, military attaché, Nigerian High Commission, London, traveled from Lagos to Kaduna to escort Nzeogwu to Lagos, all was already set for his departure. 20th January 1966, in a short ceremony outside the brigade headquarters, Nzeogwu handed over the affairs of northern Nigeria to the newly appointed governor, Katsina. Katsina made a short speech in praise and support of Nzeogwu and all he stood for and fought for. In the presence of the world press and radio, including the British Broadcasting Corporation, he expressed his determination to ensure that Nzeogwu's efforts would not be in vain. In a show of great emotion, Katsina embraced Nzeogwu before his final departure. The January coup was widely acclaimed all over the country, including the northern region. where top civil servants celebrated its success and apparently happy ending by holding parties both in their homes and in public places. Acting against my advice that it was improper from the protocol point of view, Katsina visited my house immediately after his appointment. He brought with him his entire entourage of police outriders and patrol cars and a carload of drinks. We all drank to the health of Iranti. We drank to the health of the new governors. We drank to the survival of a new Nigeria. Katsina would probably say now, I did all that to deceive old Alex into believing all was well. I sincerely believed that he was acting in good faith that night. We drank the toasts. Western Nigeria probably benefited most from this revolutionary turn of events. The military takeover brought to an end a long nightmare of bloody riots which were triggered off by the rigged Western Nigerian parliamentary elections. In the East, Midwest, and Lagos, the entire people and press hailed the change with absolute joy and optimism for the emergence of a new Nigeria, free from corruption, tribalism, and nepotism. Therefore, when people argue nowadays that Eastern Nigerians were massacred in retaliation for their role in the January coup, it sounds ridiculous. The January Revolution was not a total failure, for it achieved its primary objective, the removal of the discredited civilian regime. What went wrong was the inability of the coup to exploit its success when, therefore, the inevitable counter-coup came. The Iransi regime wobbled and collapsed. It may be relevant to mention that the coup only attained limited success in Lagos because Nzeogwu, in his determination to ensure success, selected Majors Ifejuna, Anuforo, Okafo, and Ademoyega, officers who had personal grievances against various senior military commanders, to lead it in the federal capital. The personal grievances clouded their thoughts and unfortunately adversely affected their judgments and therefore the entire Lagos operations. Without doubt, it could now be argued that if Nzeogwu had been given a free hand to kill Ojukwu, Katsina, Jesufu, and Ali Akilu, and then attack the south as he intended to do, things might have developed differently in one way or the other in Nigeria. Against this argument, one can only bear in mind that it could have been worse. But then the disaster that followed the coup was entirely due to weakness and lack of clear, realistic political objectives and discipline on the part of the military regime which inherited power. The January coup was sufficiently successful for that regime to have rectified whatever was done badly and still retain power, discipline, and respect. What happened was that Nigeria, which was being treated for an overdose of compromise by those who carried out the coup, was being administered with more doses of compromise by Iran's regime, which inherited power after the revolution.